My best friend helped me get a job when I didn't even ask for one. I wasn't unemployed, I wasn't desperate, I was just tired of office politics, the kind where work matters less than who speaks loudest. Miles told me his firm was different. "We just do the work," he said. "No games." 2 weeks after I started, a compliance email landed in my inbox. Not his, mine. It referenced transactions I didn't recognize, but my name was already on them. That's when I realized the job wasn't a favor, it was a position, and I hadn't understood what I was being placed in front of. The email came from compliance at 9:02 a.m. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't alarming. That's what made it worse. "Hi, Caleb. We're conducting a routine review of recent client reimbursements associated with Redwood Capital Partners. You're listed as the submitting associate on several transactions. Please confirm availability to walk us through the process." I reread it twice. Submitting associate. That was accurate. But it wasn't comforting. I clicked the attachment. A spreadsheet opened with dates, invoice numbers, vendors, and my name repeated down the column like a watermark. Every line had been approved. Every line had gone through, by me. I scrolled faster. The amounts weren't outrageous. 5 figures here, mid-5 figures there. Normal enough to blend in, large enough to matter. I searched the email for Miles's name. It wasn't there. No CC, no for visibility, no manager looped in, just me. I opened our internal finance system. My permissions had been expanded since my start date. Submission rights, vendor coordination, client-facing confirmations, all things Miles had told me were just part of the workflow. My phone buzzed, a message from Miles. "Hey, compliance might reach out, totally routine, don't stress." Routine. I looked back at the spreadsheet. One vendor name stood out. I didn't recognize it. I opened the invoice. Clean formatting, correct references, approved routing. But something felt off. I searched our vendor database. No history before last quarter. I searched my email. Every communication with that vendor had come through me. Not Miles, me. I forwarded the compliance email to Miles with one line. "Can you jump on this with me?" His reply came quickly. "I'm tied up with a client call. You've got this. Just explain the process." Explain the process. I leaned back in my chair and felt something shift. Not panic, awareness. Compliance wasn't asking why the money moved. They were asking who moved it. And according to every system we had, that person was me. I closed the spreadsheet slowly. For the first time since I joined Harrington and Blythe, I understood something I hadn't considered before. Miles didn't need help doing the work. He needed someone whose name could sit closer to the paper trail than his, and without realizing it, I had volunteered. Miles and I had been friends long before either of us wore suits to work. We met early in our careers, back when everything still felt merit-based. Long hours, shared complaints, late-night calls about managers who took credit for work they didn't understand. We bonded over the same frustration. Politics. I hated it. Miles learned how to navigate it. That difference never mattered until it did. By the time he called me about the job at Harrington and Blythe Advisory, I was stable but exhausted. My role paid well. My performance reviews were solid, but every quarter felt like the same game. Say the right thing in meetings. Let the loudest voice win. Watch decisions get made for reasons no one would ever write down. Miles knew that. "That place is eating you alive," he told me one night. "You don't belong in that kind of environment." I laughed it off. Then he said something that stuck. "Where I am, we don't play those games. Compliance matters. Paper trails matter. If you do the work, you're fine." That sounded like relief. I didn't apply. I didn't ask for a referral. Miles offered. He framed it as protection. "You'd be insulated here," he said. "No noise, no nonsense, just execution." The role itself looked clean. Senior associate, client finance operations, clear scope, clear reporting lines, clear expectations. Miles would be my manager. That didn't worry me. It reassured me. I trusted him. He walked my resume directly to HR, handled the interviews informally, told me leadership wanted someone steady. "Someone compliance won't worry about," he said, half joking. I remember smiling at that. The offer came quickly, no red flags, no urgency language, no pressure. I accepted because it felt like stepping out of politics, not into something else. On my first day, Miles gave me the tour, introduced me to people, explained processes, pointed out shortcuts. "Don't overthink it. he said more than once. We move a lot of money. The system keeps us honest. He emphasized trust. This firm runs on clean execution, he said. If something's wrong, compliance will catch it. I believed him, because that's what friends do. They don't just vouch for your skills, they vouch for the environment. Looking back, there was one thing I didn't ask. Why the role needed to be filled so quietly, why it moved so fast, why Miles seemed relieved once I accepted. At the time, I thought he was helping me escape politics. I didn't realize he was helping himself create distance, and I had just stepped into the space he needed someone else to occupy. At first, the work was exactly what Miles promised. Clean, structured, predictable. Client requests came in. I processed them. The system logged everything. Most of it was boring in the way finance jobs are supposed to be boring. Redwood Capital Partners generated the bulk of the activity. They had multiple managed accounts, frequent reimbursements, and a long list of vendors, legal fees, consulting retainers, operational expenses that moved constantly. Miles framed it as efficiency. They like fewer touch points, he told me. One person coordinating everything keeps it clean. So I became that person. Vendors emailed me directly. Invoices came to my inbox. Approvals flowed through my dashboard. Miles stayed visible but distant. He joined client calls, handled strategy discussions, kept relationships smooth. I handled execution. That split felt normal. Every firm has someone who talks and someone who moves things forward. The first few weeks passed without issue. Compliance didn't flag anything. Accounting reconciled cleanly. Clients were satisfied. When I had questions, Miles answered quickly. Standard expense. Client approved. Already vetted. I trusted him. Then I noticed something subtle. Miles rarely put instructions in writing. He'd stop by my desk, call me instead of emailing, say things like, just run this through like the others. Same treatment as last month. You've seen this before. And I had. Because by then, the process was familiar. Invoices looked consistent. Amounts fell within expected ranges. Nothing screamed fraud. The system accepted everything I submitted. That was the problem. Systems don't judge intent. They record action. One afternoon, I searched our internal logs out of curiosity, filtered by my name. The volume surprised me. Not because it was outrageous, but because of how central I'd become. Every reimbursement, every vendor payment, every client confirmation. My name sat at the center of it all. Miles's name appeared higher up the chain. Oversight, engagement management, client relationship owner. But when it came to execution, the trail stopped with me. I asked him once if we should rotate responsibilities. Why? He said casually. You're doing great, and compliance already trusts you. That line stuck. Not us. You. A week later, compliance sent another routine request. Nothing alarming, just a clarification on vendor categorization. They addressed it to me, again. I answered confidently. Because by then, this wasn't new. It was just the job. And that's when I realized the most dangerous part of what was happening. Nothing I was doing felt wrong in isolation. But taken together, I was becoming the face of every transaction Miles didn't want attached to his name. I didn't go to compliance because I was panicking. I went because I wanted reassurance. Something simple, something like, this is normal, you're fine. So I framed it that way. I just want to make sure I'm aligned on best practices, I wrote. Given my role, is there anything I should be especially mindful of? They replied within the hour. Meeting invite, compliance, legal, 30 minutes. That wasn't reassurance. When the call started, everyone was polite, professional, neutral. That's how these conversations always begin. The compliance lead shared her screen and pulled up a transaction summary. Redwood Capital Partners. My name was highlighted. As the submitting associate, she said, you're considered the executor of record. Executor, not coordinator, not assistant, executor. Legal picked it up from there. When transactions are reviewed, she said, we don't start with intent. We start with the paper trail. I nodded slowly. And in this case, she continued, the paper trail points to you. I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Even if I was acting under direction? There was a pause, then compliance answered. Direction matters, she said, but execution carries responsibility. Responsibility. I felt my stomach tighten. What happens if something is wrong? I asked. No one rushed to answer. That was my answer. If irregularities are confirmed, legal said carefully, the submitting party is typically the first point of accountability. Accountability. That word again. Could that affect my record? I asked. Yes, she said. Potentially permanently. Permanent. Not termination, not a warning. Permanent. I glanced down at my notes. Miles's name wasn't written anywhere. I asked one last question. Is my manager also being reviewed? Compliance didn't say no. She said, the scope of review is determined by documented involvement. Documented. I thanked them and ended the call. I sat there long after the screen went dark, because now I understood the shape of the trap. If compliance cleared the transactions, nothing would happen. But if they didn't, there wouldn't be a shared explanation. There would be a name attached to every line. Mine. Miles had built himself distance, not by disappearing, but by standing just far enough away from the execution to stay clean, and I had walked into it smiling. After the compliance call, I stopped touching anything I didn't understand completely. Not because I was scared, because I finally realized something. This role hadn't been created for me. It had been created for the problem. I started with timelines, not transactions, people. I pulled internal records the same way auditors do, quietly, methodically, without assumptions. When the role of senior associate, client finance operations was approved. When it was posted internally. When it was approved for external referral. The dates lined up too cleanly. The role was approved 3 weeks before I ever spoke to Miles about changing jobs. 3 weeks before he called me out of concern. 3 weeks before he told me Harrington and Blythe was different. That bothered me. I dug deeper. Expense controls tied to Redwood Capital Partners had been flagged twice in the prior quarter. Not escalated, not formal, just noted. The kind of note that sits quietly in a system waiting for context. Then I checked something else, internal communications. Miles had been copied on both flags, not as executor, not as approver, as engagement manager, oversight, awareness without fingerprints. I requested archived compliance summaries under the pretense of training. No one questioned it. Why would they? I was the clean executor now. That's when I saw it. A short internal memo from compliance, dated a month before my hire. Recommend narrowing execution scope to reduce exposure during ongoing review. Reduce exposure, not fix the issue, not investigate, just move it. And that's exactly what happened. Execution narrowed. To me. I sat there staring at the screen as the realization settled in fully. Miles hadn't helped me get a job. He'd solved a problem, a visibility problem, a proximity problem. He needed someone whose name could sit closer to the money than his, someone compliance wouldn't question, someone whose presence would slow things down, because investigations don't accelerate when new people are involved. They pause, they reset, they wait for patterns, and while they waited, Miles kept managing. I pulled one more thread. I looked at when compliance stopped asking Miles questions, the same week I started. That wasn't coincidence. That was relief. I finally understood why he'd been so calm, why he'd avoided written instructions, why he'd stayed just one layer above execution. This wasn't about stealing fast. It was about not getting caught slowly, and I was the buffer. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me focused, because now I knew two things for certain. Miles had already been under scrutiny, and my hiring wasn't neutral. It was strategic, which meant the only way out wasn't confrontation. It was documentation. If he wanted distance, I was about to remove it. I didn't accuse Miles. I didn't even change my tone. I just changed how I worked. The first thing I did was stop taking instructions verbally. If Miles stopped by my desk, I'd listen, then follow up with an email. Just confirming next steps based on what we discussed. If he called, I'd summarize afterward. For documentation, here's what I'll proceed with unless you advise otherwise. He never objected. Why would he? From his perspective, this looked like professionalism, like maturity, like exactly the kind of associate compliance would trust. Next, I asked for clarity. Not aggressively. Precisely. Before I submit this reimbursement, can you confirm this vendor was approved under your engagement scope? Or, given the amount, should this be categorized as discretionary spend per your direction? Miles replied quickly. Always affirmative. Always confident. Yes, that's fine. Proceed. That aligns with my approach. Every reply pulled his name closer to the execution. Then I widened the audience. I CC'd compliance for alignment, copied accounting to avoid duplication, included legal just in case this comes up later. Miles didn't push back. He couldn't. Pushing back would have raised questions, and questions were exactly what he'd been trying to avoid. The turning point came with a reimbursement request from Redwood, a large one, still within normal range, but just high enough to matter. In the past, Miles would have told me verbally to run it through. This time, I sent him a short email. Before submitting, can you confirm this aligns with the vendor strategy you approved last quarter? Compliance has been sensitive to categorization lately. He replied 10 minutes later. Yes, I approved this structure. Go ahead. I forwarded that response, unchanged, to compliance, not as an accusation, as context. The reply from compliance came an hour later. Thank you for clarifying. We may have follow-up questions for the engagement manager. Engagement manager, not me. From that point on, the tone shifted. Compliance started asking Miles questions directly, not confrontational ones, clarifying ones. Why this vendor? Why this frequency? Why this categorization? Miles answered at first the same way he always had, calm, assured, high level. But this time, his answers were attached to transactions, dates, amounts, approvals. The distance he'd built began to collapse. He tried to pull me aside one afternoon. You don't need to CC compliance on everything, he said lightly. I smiled. I just want to make sure we're protected, I replied, especially given the review. Protected. He nodded, but something in his expression changed. Not anger, calculation. He realized I wasn't just executing anymore. I was recording. By the end of the week, compliance requested a formal walkthrough. They asked for approval, rationale, vendor history, decision ownership. Miles was invited. Required. I was invited too. But this time, I wasn't at the center of the questions. I was there to provide documentation. And for the first time since I joined Harrington and Blythe, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Because the paper trail no longer ended with me. It ended where it always should have, with the person who designed it. The meeting invite didn't explain much. Subject: transaction review. Redwood Capital Partners required. Engagement management. Optional: client finance operations. I noticed the change immediately. For the first time since I joined Harrington and Blythe, I wasn't listed as required. Miles was. The meeting itself was calm. Too calm. Compliance led. Legal observed. Accounting took notes. No one accused anyone of anything. They walked through the timeline. When the vendor relationship began, who approved the structure? Who determined categorization? Who confirmed frequency? Every answer led back to Miles. Not emotionally, not dramatically, administratively. Compliance shared a screen, an email chain, another one, then another. All confirmations came from the same place, Miles. They asked him to explain the business rationale. He did. Smoothly, he always had. Then legal asked a different kind of question. Why were execution responsibilities reassigned shortly before these transactions increased in volume? Miles paused, just a fraction of a second. Operational efficiency, he said. We wanted fewer bottlenecks. Compliance nodded. And were you aware that an internal review was already open at that time? The room went quiet. Miles looked at the screen. I was generally aware of monitoring, he said carefully. Legal didn't react. They asked the next question. Did you consider whether moving execution away from yourself could affect how responsibility was assessed? Miles opened his mouth, closed it, then answered. At the time, no. That was the moment the meeting changed, because now it wasn't about transactions, it was about intent. Compliance wrapped up by saying they'd be expanding the scope of the review, focused on engagement-level decision-making. They didn't say Miles's name again. They didn't need to. Over the next 2 weeks, my workload dropped sharply. Not because business slowed, because approvals stopped coming to me. They went up the chain. Miles stopped copying me. Then he stopped messaging me altogether. I heard about the outcome the way most people do in firms like ours, indirectly. Legal asked me for a final statement of process. Compliance thanked me for my cooperation. HR scheduled a routine check-in. They told me I was cleared, that my actions were documented as execution under direction, that the review would reflect that. Miles wasn't cleared. He didn't get a meeting with HR. He got a letter, formal, final. The internal notice went out the following Monday. Short, carefully worded. Miles Kessler is no longer with Harrington and Blythe Advisory. We wish him the best in his future endeavors. No mention of why, no explanation, but in a firm like ours, silence is explanation. Later that week, compliance sent a final email. Thank you for ensuring accurate documentation during the review. That was it. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, just closure. Miles never reached out, not to explain, not to apologize, and that told me everything I needed to know. The firm moved on faster than I expected. Clients didn't leave. Revenue didn't dip. Meetings stayed on the calendar. Miles's name disappeared from systems the same way it had appeared in my life, quietly. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. HR followed up with me a week later. They confirmed my role was staying exactly where it was. Same responsibilities, same scope, clear reporting lines. They told me something else, too. If you hadn't documented the way you did, the HR rep said carefully, this could have gone very differently. I knew what she meant. If the paper trail had stopped with me, if the execution had stayed under my name, if the instructions had remained verbal, I would have been the problem, professionally, permanently. A month later, I ran into someone who used to work with Miles at another firm. They mentioned his name like it was already history. Smart guy, they said, just always kept his hands clean. That line stayed with me, because I finally understood what I'd been to him, not a friend, a buffer. I still think about the call where he offered me the job, how grateful I'd been, how relieved I felt leaving politics behind. The irony is that he didn't rescue me from office games. He just moved me into a quieter one. I never heard from Miles again. No message, no explanation, no apology, and in a strange way that made sense. You don't reach out to someone who almost took your fall. I still read every approval line now, every CC, every signature. Not because I don't trust people, because I know how easily trust can be used as placement. He helped me get the job. I just didn't know the real reason at first.